released, and he talked about famous one in South Africa, in the Kalahari Desert. So, what do you know about that particular UFO crash?
Yeah, that was part of in the beginning of the book. He did claim that we did get a lot of our technology from those crashes. I'm sure, of course, he knew of Roswell and how that was tied into it. But he said those crashes in the Kalahari Desert were also very significant, to say the least. But he, at the same time, and I think, yeah, at the same time, he's talking about the technology in general. I think he brings up. It just reminds me of the topic of particleization and void to mass, and then also Elizabeth Klarer, who wrote Beyond the Light Barrier, and she was a contactee within South Africa, and I think he holds that of significance, and her all the information she shared till her death in the 94, I guess. So very interesting. She had been, I know you've talked about that, Dr. Salla, and how she had a particular contactee with the being from, I forget which star system or where it was, but Akon, maybe it was his name. So that's interesting. She had so much information, mathematics, how the universe worked, how light, changes in frequency. Everything's basically light and changes in frequency, similar to what Tesla always said. And if you change those frequency rates, you can even take time out of the equation and end up from one part of the universe to the other. And all the physics that we're trying to still understand right now, or that are probably hidden from us. So.
Right. She had contact with beings from Proxima Centauri, and she worked with South African intelligence during the Second World War, and was active after the Second World War with the South African intelligence. So I suspect, given your grandfather's involvement with the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit and their kind of work in finding extraterrestrial craft that had crashed, and then later with the NRO, that maybe he may have gotten to work with her directly, or at least would have been very familiar with her case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know if we can see this on, but this is the. No, it's not going to work. Sorry, I had that image you were talking about, Derek, from the Majestic document with the different types of craft that they were looking for in the retrievals.
Right. Now another thing, Dr. Salla, that I don't know if you'll get to the deep underground military bases and Phil Schneider's story, but I can tell you that just what you were saying about trying to be careful about what information you show to the public domain, and if you had this background and knowledge, well, he did claim that he was friends with Phil Schneider towards the end, and the fact that they exchanged information. They met in DC at some point and started to exchange information and learned a lot from each other. What one had, the other one didn't know, and they really had a good bond and friendship towards the end. And I remember seeing a VHS tape of Phil Schneider when visiting in Taos in the mid to late 90s. So I know a grandfather was, bringing people into the house and showing this tape and showing the significance of that. And Phil Schneider's story, of course, that he was the one engineer, a geo engineer that was working on building the tunnels, and he ended up in an interaction with the aliens, the Greys, and ended up getting shot with some beam ray gun, and that's why he ended up getting cancer. He had a disfigured hand, and so basically he had cancer. So my grandfather said in the book, I just read that part, it's funny you find the gems like this. And he said, yeah, he was great friends with Phil, but Phil knew he was going to die, so he wasn't being careful at all. He said, well, I'm already dying, so I might as well get this information out as fast as possible. So that shows you the difference between our grandfather trying to be a little bit more cautious and Phil Schneider's case, where he was obviously killed.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I know that you mentioned your grandfather started talking in 1993 after his retirement from the NRO, and Phil Schneider burst onto the scene in 1995, and I think it was in January of 1996 that he was found strangled to death in his apartment, and people that knew him said that there was no way that he would have done that to himself, and he was warned. He had warned people that that he was not suicidal. That if that he was found dead, it was because they took him out. But as you said, he just kind of went he just kind of like really took to revealing everything he knew about the Dulce base. And of course, the Dulce base is this kind of multi-level, 7-story deep underground military base that's very famous in the literature. So you want to maybe talk a little bit more? Well, maybe what did your grandfather say about Phil Schneider and his kind of experiences at Dulce and elsewhere that kind of stood out for you as significant?
Dan, do you remember any direct conversations you had with him?
Not about the. I mean, he mentioned underground bases, but no specifics with Phil Schneider. Didn't he take you to Dulce one time?
Yeah, I was about to say, this is the way our grandfather was. I mean, and maybe he was being protective of us as part of his family. He, especially with me, he never really went heavy into detail on any of these subjects. He said, of course, we're not alone in the universe. There's aliens that have been around forever and, we've interacted with, and, he actually called me a star. I was a star child when I was very, very little. So before I get to the Dulce story, because I do have a direct event that happened with me and my grandfather there, but he did call me a star child, and I'm not sure why, but I asked my mom, why did he do that? Why did he say that? And this was before that term was really thrown out there, and it was because we moved to a new home, a new town, and my grandfather had visited right at the same time, and he just took me for a drive, and he basically said, okay, well, I want to find out, let's go to the cemetery. Let's try to find the local cemetery. And he would just say, okay, tell me which direction to go. And I would, I would just say left or right, or we started driving. And apparently we found the cemetery easy enough. So he just told my mom, that must be one of the reasons. But I think it's not like I have those abilities now, but as a kid, like 5 or 6, I think everybody has those abilities in them. And then over time, we start to maybe lose them, and we get indoctrinated in a way. So who knows? That was just an interesting side story, but we would take drives all the time. And it's so interesting that as a teenager in Taos, and he'd take me up to Colorado Springs. He wanted me to be part of the Air Force. He really wanted me to go to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. So I was, of course, enthusiastic about flying and doing that. But he would never go into these subjects very deeply. We would have long pauses, just driving down the road. And I remember we'd go to Dulce or drive through Dulce because he knew that was significant and he wanted to show that to me. But, a lot of times that we wouldn't say much. And then I'd say stuff like, wow, you can really think a lot out here. So he told my mom like that was profound that I would say a statement like that as a kid. But the fact was, when we got to Dulce, he said, this is a pretty important place. And he was alluding to the underground base. He didn't go into much detail, but as we're driving and getting closer, he said, this is the area right here. If you see that mesa, this is kind of the area where all this interaction took place. And I think, I'm not sure how much he told me about Phil Schneider, but he was alluding to that. And as soon as we got there into that area, unmarked SUVs started coming up behind us. And I think, there was one behind us, or maybe one in front too, and just kind of showing us, hey, you probably shouldn't be here. And my grandfather said right away, okay, that's our sign to get out of here. So we're just going to keep going. But that was an instance I remember. So of course he knew a lot about Dulce. And I'll say this is an interesting story. As one of the times I was out in Taos, and I want to share it because, if I don't share all these experiences that I had, then it just kind of, I want people to understand that life isn't always what you think it is, and the reality that we're taught. And this instance happened to me outside of our grandfather's home, middle of the night. It was 3 a.m, and I was with somebody. I was with a friend, and we're just going down the highway. He lived in Pot Creek, which is just outside of Taos, towards the mountains. So we went to the highway. We looked up on top of the hill where the full moon was, and that was towards the mountains. So we just started walking that direction. And we both looked, and once we looked up there, we saw that there was this silhouette of some image of something coming at us, and it was like basically running towards us. And we know what, you know what a deer looks like, you know what a bear looks like. And we saw this thing, and it looked like it was basically upright, and it seemed to have a tail, because we could see that it was moving behind it and swaying behind it as it was kind of hobbling or running towards us. And it was still quite a long ways away, but that was something that we did encounter, and we both looked at it, and we both were just like, let's go, we got to get out of here as fast as we can. So that did happen, and I put it out of my mind for a long time, but it was basically like a giant lizard that it seemed to be coming towards us. So who knows? Like I said, you go through life, you might have an experience like that and completely block it out of memory, because how do you fit it into your day-to-day life? But after researching more and more and looking at all this information our grandfather had, that kind of ties into a lot of this information about the reptilians and these things. And he never mentioned reptilians directly to me, but he mentioned the Greys all the time. So, and how that, and he had videos about the Greys in a lot of depth and detail. So, yeah.
Well, it's very interesting that he befriended Phil Schneider, because it sounds like he was one of those people, because it seems that a lot of people who have gone through the projects and then retire, a lot of them just walk away from it, and they just do retirement things, and that's it. And they're not going to talk about it. They carry the secrets to the grave. And others, like your grandfather, they become active, and they seek out others who have had similar experiences, because they're trying to connect the dots. They're trying to get the big picture, because now they've got a big slice of the picture, but now they're wanting to get other people's perspectives, and they're trying to connect it all, because that seems to be really what we need most in the general public, is people who are familiar with certain projects, connecting the dots to other projects and forming friendships, so you get the overall big picture, rather than trying to just use one perspective and try and extrapolate from that. So your grandfather was clearly someone trying to do that, and his book, Life with the Cosmos Clearance, I think it really is an important book, because it does represent someone with a very strong background in this area, connecting the dots by working with or talking about other people who have had similar experiences, but in very different projects.
He was very passionate about sharing information to wake up humanity, and we've seen videos of him in the 90s where he was kind of doing just that, trying to connect the dots for people and make sure that we're not being fooled generation after generation again by our governments, and it was really important to him, and that's why it's important to us as well to carry on his legacy and do what we can to let people know what's happening, and the more we know, the better off we'll be.
He really was more spiritually, on that spiritual side, at least towards the end. And he had some Native American in him, so he kind of took that more seriously and saw the value and the traditions of the Native Americans, indigenous, and how that their prophecy, the Hopi prophecy, and all these things are starting to come true. And if we don't take care of Mother Gaia and Mother of Earth, then of course it's gonna start showing us more earthquakes, more things like that, things that were prophesied even by Edgar Cayce and Nostradamus even. But these don't necessarily have to be our future. It's just the possible outcomes if we continue down the road we're down. So he was very much trying to tell people, we need to wake up, and we need to wake up fast. And he's very much a proponent of that. And just to tell you, I guess a couple other people he connected with, Bill Cooper was one that he said that he was friends with, and they exchanged information. And I think I loved his information. And The Behold the Pale Horse, I really was a follower of Bill Cooper, and we know that he was killed after disclosing 9/11 and Osama bin Laden as the scapegoat and everything else. So he did say that what our grandfather did in the Air Force, he said what Bill Cooper did in the Navy is what he did for the Air Force, is how he explained it. So.
Yeah. his book is actually published by the same company that Bill Cooper used for his book as well. So I think they definitely had a connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, just love the fact that your grandfather was working with these other pioneers or these other very brave whistleblowers, because that's what they were. Phil Schneider, William Cooper, your grandfather, others, Clifford Stone's another more recent one, that these guys were all very brave and out there sharing the information. And your grandfather was befriending them and sharing their information. And that's great that he knew William Cooper as well as Phil Schneider.